Gang, illegal immigration has dropped 90% at the Arizona border. These are figures that have come out as of December of last year, last month. So we're going to take a look at the numbers, and we're going to find out what's really behind this massive decrease in illegal border crossings under the Trump administration. I think it's going to absolutely make your day. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here. It's great to be with you as always. Before we dive into the numbers and the changes in policies that in many respects has almost completely ended illegal immigration in the United States, I want to give a huge and very timely shout out to the sponsor of this video, and that's our good friends over at My Patriot Food Supply. Now, I have to say, with the advent of the coronavirus and the quarantines being enforced and the picture of the empty shelves that we're seeing coming from Wuhan and other places, it's such a relief to know that we have My Patriot Food Supply available to us. Gang, they're simply the best, and there's frankly never been a better time to stock up on an emergency food supply, and no one makes that easier and more affordable than My Patriot Supply. Their food kits last up to 25 years in storage. They include breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. And if you act now, you'll save 40% on a 2-week emergency food kit when you go to my special website by clicking on that link below. It's a limited time offer, so don't wait for an emergency to happen before you respond to one. Take action now by clicking on the link below and save 40% off with your 2-week emergency food kit today. I've got mine. Make sure to get yours. All right, so we have some pretty amazing news coming from the southern border. Illegal border crossings have plunged 90% at the Arizona border as of December 2019. This according to the Associated Press. Last winter, the number of illegal border crossers that were apprehended surged. There were over 60,000 migrants taken into custody by the United States Border Patrol, okay? The number skyrocketed even more over the spring of last year, sometimes topping over 100,000 apprehensions. But if what's happening at the Arizona border is any indicator, we may have seen the single most dramatic drop for illegal border crossings recorded in recent memory. Here are the stats. In Arizona alone, the Border Patrol registered around 14,000 apprehensions of illegal border crossers in May of last year. But as of October the same year, you ready for this? That number dropped to an astonishing 800 apprehensions. In a matter of just a few months, illegal border crossings went from 14,000 to no more than 800. The decline continued into December, resulting in a decrease in illegal border crossings of more than 90%, 94% to be exact. So what's going on here? How are we seeing such dramatic decreases coming from the southern border? Well, there's obviously going to be a number of reasons, but a major one involves the Trump administration's policy of what's technically called a kind of offshore processing. And what this involves is the policy of sending illegal border crossers back to one of the three nations. Usually it's the first nation they entered into on their way to the United States. So more often than not, that involves sending them back to Mexico until their asylum case comes before a judge. Now, just to give you a sense of how radically things have changed under Trump. Asylum seekers, for example, were given a piece of paper with a court date on it. And then the migrants were told to stay with friends or family until they had to appear before the judge. This was during the Obama period. And so by the time their case came around, sometimes 2 or 3 years after their apprehension, they never showed up and they were impossible to find, all right? So here's what the Trump administration did, okay? They realized that the main goal of many migrants was actually to get apprehended by border security, be given this piece of paper with a court date on it, and then spend the rest of their time in the United States, right? Unfound. So the Trump administration now requires that waiting period happen in either Mexico or Guatemala. Since the waiting period can take upwards of 2 to 3 years, the person ends up staying the whole time in Mexico or Guatemala, and they figure it's not worth it anymore. And so we've seen this dramatic decline in illegal borders crossings with just this one major policy change. Now, the policy change is, of course, the result of the fact that there's been a major paradigm change in the whole conception of migration, not just here in the United States, but indeed throughout the world, primarily in Europe. policy changes are the result of paradigm changes, right? Policy changes are a result of paradigm changes. And what we have to understand is that our migration paradigm, or how we interpret the migrant and migration as a whole, either as legal or illegal immigrant, or as a forced migrant in terms of refugees on the other, that kind of thing. The paradigm by which we interpret the migrant has gone through significant changes over the last few decades. Since the Cold War, we've in fact seen three major paradigms emerge from migration. So during the height of the Cold War, the migrant patterns were generally from east to west, from the Soviet East to the democratic West, right? Like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, for example. And the assumption was that this would be a permanent settlement. Back then, it appeared the Soviet Union would be in existence indefinitely, and so resettlement of the migrant was generally the paradigm that dominated those Cold War years. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we tended to switch more to an interventionist paradigm that sought to alleviate the political and economic or religious conditions for why people were leaving their countries in the first place. And this was sort of the end of history paradigm, pushed by Francis Fukuyama, that Western liberal democracy would change all the nations of the world to look more and more like the West. And so you won't need to migrate anymore because of adverse political or economic or religious reason. That all effectively died the morning of September 11th, okay? It died in Europe as well in the 2015 coordinated Paris attacks. And what happened is that the interventionist paradigm gave way to what we now call the securitization paradigm, where now refugees and migrants are interpreted in relation to national security. What's so interesting here is that the securitization this paradigm has ended, at least for the foreseeable future, any notion of the homogeneous migrant, right? So the other two paradigms, the relocation paradigm and the interventionist paradigm, they tended to see all refugees or illegal immigrants generally in the same way, as sympathetic figures who were trying to find a better life. But since 9/11, whether we like it or not, migrants are simply not viewed that way anymore. Now they're viewed increasingly heterogeneous, right? They're seen as a mixed bag that contains very real threats. We talked about this on our video where Texas has now refused to take in any refugees from this point forward. You'll definitely want to check out that video because I think it teases out a lot of these themes, but from different vantage points, and it'll help you better understand what's going on in the world in terms of border security. But there we highlighted a study, a major academic study, that had the ominous title, "No Good Deed Goes Unpunished." All right, how's that for a title? No good deed goes unpunished. And the argument of these scholars is that data analysis of 154 countries over a 37-year period up to 2007 showed evidence that countries with many refugees are far more likely to experience both domestic and international terrorism. And that's, by the way, only one study of several others out there showing this connection between the higher the refugee population, the higher the risk of violence. So regardless of where one stands on this issue, the capacity to vet refugees and migrants as a whole is radically limited. It's virtually impossible to discriminate between, say, a genuine refugee and a fraud, and say an economic migrant, let alone a terrorist. And so this fact of the ambiguity of screening, along with the heightened risk of violence proportionate to the refugee population in one's nation, that solidified a securitization paradigm that is now at the heart of modern migration. And there are no signs at all that securitization is going anywhere. If anything, we're beginning to see left-wing parties like the Danish Social Democrats or the far-left Die Linke Party in Germany, and I'm even hearing the Social Democrats in Austria are all beginning to adopt a thoroughly right-wing border security position, at least when it comes to their political platforms, right? With this kind of success that we're seeing at the southern border and with Viktor Orban's Hungary and the Law and Justice Party and Poland, heck, with European nations as a whole securing their borders, I think we've seen the triumph of the securitization paradigm for many, many more years to come. Now, before you go, I did just upload our video on the coronavirus, what the latest numbers are, and what it means for continued border enforcement as more and more nations have indeed closed their borders. I think you'll find the conversation very enriching. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.